All right, folks, well, as promised in that one episode, we got dear old mom today, and we're gonna drop her down this shaft. But first, we gotta make sure we got a good knot here. So I'm gonna use my best shoelace knot. Is that okay, Ma? Okay, there you go. That one ought to hold. All right, well, I'm gonna stand back here and hold on to you. Head on over there. Don't worry, everything's gonna be okay. Well, welcome back, everybody, and welcome to Swanessa, Arizona. That's right, I decided that we're going to do a ghost town on this adventure. We got dear old mom running around down there. She can't climb up these hills like I can. So while she does that, we're going to do our thing and kind of scratch around here and learn a little about the history of this place. No, not too much, because if I did, the video would be 2 hours long. So I'll try to inform you just on some of the hot topics of this site, such as Swanessa used to have, somewhere between 300 and 700 people living in it at the height of operations. And so this area was discovered back in 1862. And by 1908, all the claims from those prospectors were bought up by the Clara Gold and Copper Mining Company. That's right, Clara Gold is what initially started this operation, and they sunk a total of 5 shafts, and you can see them out there. Yeah, the BLM has them all gated up now with bat bars, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's one right behind me that I tried to drop my mom down into. That would be number 5. So yeah, this was quite the operation. And the cool thing is where I'm standing right here is just about the exact same location as you can pull up old photographs of this on the internet. And down below, so you can see where the workers, that was kind of like the miners' camp down there. Those were barracks. There's a rock in the foreground here. You can see that in the old pictures. You can clearly see the old barracks. And then off to the right was the dust chamber for the smelter. And then straight off in front of us here was the gravity separator that they installed after they built the smelter. I'll tell you more about that later. But I'll quickly post a picture here so you can kind of get an idea of what the town used to look like, and then here's what it looks like now. So here we go. I'm going to post a picture, and 3, 2, 1. Pretty cool, huh? So, all right. Well, let's start this adventure off and work our way down to where the miners slept and lived down in this location. Now, that wasn't the only place that they lived. No, off to the left here, there was like a whole town down in here. I mean, they had all sorts of things. They had dentists and drugstores and lumber store, and this was a full-size legitimate town. But it's all gone now, and of course all that wood has been hauled off and recycled in other areas, and all that remains now is what was built with adobe and whatever couldn't be, hauled off and recycled. So yeah, let's work our way down to the workman's camp down here. Okay, folks, before we get down into the town site, and since I'm already up on the side of this hill, I wanted to show you what naturally occurring galena looks like right out of the vein. Take a look here. Here's a nice big chunk. See how shiny that is? Yep, that's Galina. Lead sulfide, silver sulfide. Okay. Look at it running through the rock here. Look at the size of this piece. Holy cow, I can hardly pick it up. Why is it so heavy? Because the vast majority of that rock is lead. Great if you have a lead mine. Not so great if you're trying to get the silver out of that rock, because that was a really hard thing to do. And that's why it's still sitting here to this very day. Let's get up here on it. Look at the size of this piece. Right there. I saw some other really cool areas with the Galina coming out. Let's work our way up here real quick. I'm going to show you that. Take a look at this. This is pretty cool. See them stringers coming out of the rock there? Yeah, all shiny. I suppose if you didn't know what that was, you'd be jumping up and down thinking you struck it rich with silver. Yeah, well, once you learned how hard it is to get the silver out of that stuff, you're not going to be jumping up and down anymore. So why didn't the miners take this? Why is this still sitting here? Well, miners were smart, and they certainly didn't chase after these little stringers. Yeah, I suppose they could have chipped it away and hauled it off, but they were after the vein, the ore body that was a little bit more substantial. For example, take a look over here. Caught this out of the corner of my eye. Ooh, there's a lizard right there, see? There is lizards running all over this place. Pretty big ones too. Okay, take a look at the vein over here. See how much wider it is through this area? And they were definitely chipping into it. So, I mean, if I was a miner, that's what I'd go after. But as I was saying, why is it still here? Well, you know, you pick up one of these rocks. Now, I've found plenty of Galina in the past. Okay. The weight on that's a heavy rock. That thing has some heft to it. And just by the amount of heft that it has tells me this thing is going to be really, really high in lead and probably really low in silver. Of course, you're not going to know until you have it assayed, but I would imagine that the reason it's all still sitting here is because it's just too high in lead, too low in silver, so they just let it lay. All right, well, as you can see, the town site again is before us, so let's work our way down into the bottom. And I think the coolest place to start would be down over there where the miners' quarters were. Yeah, they kind of had like a man camp down in there. Let's start our adventure over there. All right, we're down here by the workers' cottages, and I thought that a fun way to do today's explore was to kind of pretend as if we're a miner ourselves. So what do? Well, you start your day off at a worker's cottage. You wake up and then go to the mine. So let's kind of do it that way. We'll work our way all the way through the mine as if we're a worker ourselves until we end up over the location where they would load the ore up on the trains, and the train would haul it off over to Parker, Arizona, and eventually down to the Colorado River. So yeah, we're over here at the workers' cottages, and according to the sign, it says that they were built by Swanessa Lease Incorporated, 1917. Interesting. So when I was driving down to this location, we're roughly 22 miles, give or take, from the nearest main road. And what I read in all the literature about this place is that most of the miners came out here via railroad. So things really didn't start to pick up until after that railroad was built. All right, let's looks like we're going in through a window here, are we? No, this was actually the door, but okay, let's take a look. Brick, mud, and stucco. Very traditional way of building a structure out in the desert. And well, why did they do it that way? Because there's not much wood out here. Yeah, there's actually none except for native mesquite and a whole bunch of cactus. Here's another one. Looks like we got some leftovers when the BLM came out here and reconditioned the stucco. They had space in the corner for probably a potbelly stove. Went up there, you can see the inlet on the wall. Because yes, it did get cold in the desert. I've been down here for roughly 6 months now over the winter, and it did get down to 38 degrees one night. So that's something you got to have even in the desert, the stove to keep you warm. Plus you can do your cooking on it too. Let's look at this one here. So many guys you think slept in here? I'm going to say that could comfortably hold 6 men. And don't forget, those guys worked in shifts. So when how would I explain this? They shared their bed. They probably didn't share their bedding, but they shared their bed. One shift would go out, another shift would come in, those guys would sleep, so you're sharing your bed with other men. Okay, now we're going to work our way through this location pretty quick because it's very large and there's a lot to talk about, but it's all really cool if you're interested in copper and smelting. Oh, this one here still has the floor in it, or at least some of it. See that? Tongue and groove even. Fancy. All right, so that's where we just came from. For the heck of it, let's walk over here. We'll make our way back to Old Bob. So some have asked me, how come when you get out to these desert locations such as this, and well, here's a pile of lumber, here's some left over, but in most cases you don't find a lot of lumber left over. Well, that's because after these places shut down, you got to remember all of that lumber, all them board feet of lumber were hauled in here by train, because trees don't grow in the desert. So when the place shut down, everything was scrapped. They took all the lumber, they took all the steel, anything that could be salvaged or recycled and scrapped was all taken away. Well, the BLM did a really nice job of putting a new roof. See this? That's right, they came out here and repaired this. Re-stuccoed the sides, put a new roof on it to try to help preserve this site. They did a pretty nice job. All right, well, next let's work our way over to the shaft and scratch around over there. See you over there. Okay, we're coming up on one of the 5 shafts. And the BLM did a nice job of blocking this off to keep people from falling down into it. Now, how big was this thing? Well, let's just say it's huge. When you build a smelter, which we can see up on the hill over here, and we'll be exploring that here pretty soon. When you build a smelter that's capable of processing 700 ton per hour, I can only imagine what the workings look like down below us here. There is somewhat of a map on the entrance to this location coming in, and basically it shows a vertical shaft with drift levels, and then there was also a sump, or basically all mines of this size have had a sump in the bottom or a water collection point Then they would run a pump down in there to keep the pump out all the water, keep the mine dry. But they had big problems with this mine, and what that problem was that timber resources were pretty hard to come by. All of the timbering for this mine had to be brought in here by train, and of course that costs a lot of money. That's going to narrow your margins on your copper that you're trying to get out of the ground. So what they did on this mine is they implemented the pillar method of mining, and you've seen that in other mines, especially when you get into big stopes. Okay, they've rather than using square set timbering, which takes, as you know, a lot of wood, in mines like this they would just leave pillars in place down under there, and those would be the supports for the back of the mine and the backs of the stoped out areas. Problem is that this material was really high in iron, and according to the literature, it was really super soft. So sometimes, even though when they left a pillar in place, those pillars would just collapse and crush, and an entire section of the mine would give way and collapse in, and then they'd have to go back in and clean it all out again before they could restart operations. Now, I didn't read anything where miners died in some of those collapses. I didn't find anything like that in the literature, but I did find that this location does have a couple of cemeteries east of town over there, and if we have enough time, we're going to go over there and take a look at those. So it was a pretty dangerous operation. All right, next up, I was looking at this. Can you imagine the size of the head frame? Look at, that had to be just incredible. I need a time machine, folks. That'd be too cool. Okay, where was I? All right, so our next stop. Okay, where do you take the where do you take the ore after it comes up out of the ground? Next stop is the smelter. Meet you over there. Okay, well, I just had to hike all the way up to the top of this hill because you can't have a town out in the middle of the desert without water. And up on this hill is where they had the gigantic water tanks. You can see here they had 3 of them, 1, 2, and 3 out there. And from what I've learned is that they ran a pipeline all the way from the Bill Williams River to this location, which is about 3.5 miles approximately. And this water was used not only to support the town, but it was used to operate the steam generators that produced electricity for the smelter. But take a look at the size of these. That's probably 35 feet, 40 feet in diameter. And we got some old rivets laying on the ground here. Yeah. Yep, everything back then was done with rivets. This one here had a steel base, all put together with rivets. But out here, let's take a look at this one. These two were made out of concrete, so at one time the tank probably sat on top of this, and that's all been taken away and salvaged. But wonder how many gallons each one of these held. They're pretty good size. Take a look at this one here. Sometimes, if you're lucky, people that did the concrete work here will scratch their initials or names somewhere around the edge. And I walked around, I didn't see any of that. Didn't get lucky this time. But it appears that they formed it with a piece of steel, bent it into a circle, and then poured the concrete over top, then laid the water tower up here. The outlet is pretty good sized. Let's see here, show it to you. There's one of the outlets. That's a 4-inch diameter cast iron pipe, plugged, and then they ran it out that way down to the smelter. Okay, let's get down over there. See you there. So as we work our way over here to where the power station was and the refinery, I thought I'd explain to you a little bit about what kind of copper ore they were pulling out of this mine. So copper ore comes in many different forms. You've got copper carbonate, copper pyrite, copper malachite, but unfortunately all of those contain high amounts of sulfides, and before you can get your copper out of the ore, you got to get your sulfides out of there. So how was that done? Well, when you are refining or smelting ore, the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to crush the ore up into a really fine powder and put it through a dust chamber. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But that was the first process in getting sulfides out of your ore. So let's hold off on that for a moment and talk about this power plant here, okay, and the refinery. Now this power plant and refinery were built right around 1910. And yeah, that was easy for me to remember because it says it right there on the sign. But what made this interesting is the fellow that was in charge of this operation, and I don't remember his name. I'm gonna have to look it up. It's in my notes, but we'll come back to that. But he dumped way too much money into the smelting and refining part of this operation, when what he should have done is he should have first put his money into some sort of a gravity separation method, because gravity separation of copper ore can get all the way up to about 98% efficient. That's a really efficient method of doing it. But they didn't do that. This guy was in charge of all the money, and he quickly dumped all those bucks from those investors into this power plant and into the refinery over here. All right, we're going to go over here to the power plant first, because without a power plant, you're not going to have a smelting operation. Let's do that first. So yeah, I went back to my notes. His name was George Mitchell, okay? And old Mr. Mitchell, he was responsible for $3 million. Can you imagine having that kind of money at your disposal in the early 1900s, between 1908 and 1911, kind of in that area? $3 million from many different investors. So old Mr. Mitchell, he went at this thing full bore. He put in a giant power station here with steam-driven generators. Look at the size of these studs. They're about 1.5 inches. And look up here. So when you're employing generators, sometimes you have to make a well, okay, because you have a big wheel here. That's why you have this divot. But by the looks of it, I'm seeing, well, you know, it's really hard to tell. A lot of those generators had many different configurations, but this was sizable. So this produced the power. Well, how do you make steam? What do you burn to make steam? Well, they burned coal. But the curious thing, as I walk around here, I'm not seeing where they dumped out all of the clinkers. You know, you folks back east, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and that area in coal mine country, you all know what clinkers are. That's the byproduct of burning coal. It's the part of the piece of coal that doesn't burn in your stove. It's left over like clay and rock, and then every few days you got to go in with a shovel in your stove and clean out the clinkers. Well, they had to do the same thing here if they're burning coal for their steam-driven power plant. But where did they throw their, I mean, I would imagine that there should be like a huge pile of coal clinkers laying around here, but I haven't found them yet. So so now, okay, we're producing power out of this power station. Where does that power go? Well, let's turn around over here. It's going to go down here to the furnace, into the smelter. And let's walk down over there and I'll tell you more about that. All right, here we are overlooking the furnace. And like I said earlier, Mr. Mitchell did everything in a big way. Well, you know, he had tons of money at his disposal and he had to keep impressing new investors. So he built this 700 ton per day, I would imagine it's 700 tons per day furnace. And you got two different kinds of furnaces. You have your least efficient, what was called a flash furnace, and then you have your reverberatory furnace. That's what this was. All right. So if you can imagine, all down through here, this is where all your smelters were, and we're standing up on top of it, looking down to kind of give you an idea of the scale of this thing. Just huge. So people that work in steel mills, you kind of have a grasp of what's going on here. For those the folks that have never been in a steel mill, now this furnace, or this refinery, I should say, was powered and heated by electricity. So what you got is you got two big, or actually a multitude of carbon rods that are coming down and sitting in the molten floating slag, okay? And they would supply very high amperage amounts into those big carbon rods that would go down into the slag, and that would heat up and turn your ore molten. Now, understand that when you're a refinery, you're doing this constantly. It's not like you just fill up a crucible, fire it, scrape off the slag, pour it out, and haul it away. Oh no, it was a series of crucibles, one after another. And so you at the topmost, or the starting point of your refinery process, that's where you get most of your slag. And throughout that process, you're adding coke, which is drawing out more of the impurities out of the copper ore, and you're slowly pulling that slag off until finally you get down to the reverberatory furnace down here, and that's where your copper is going to be at its most pure. All right, let's work our way down there and take a look at that. So we're working our way down over here to the reverberatory furnace, and so what they would use large quantities of in this process was a material called coca. No, not the Coke you drink, and no, you guys, not the other kind. Quit snickering. No, Coke is carbon, and how you make it is you take coal and you put it into basically a big oven, and you heat it, kind of like you're making charcoal. So what you're doing, here we go, here's the sign. Reverberatory furnace, built 1913. All right, so what you're doing is you're heating the coal in a low oxygen environment, and that's basically what you're doing is you're distilling it, okay? And then when you're done, you don't have coal anymore, you have coke. And coke was mixed in to the molten ore to help pull out all of the impurities in the form of slag. So if you imagine the process, you're leapfrogging from one crucible to the next. You're adding coke along the way, especially down here in the reverberatory furnace, to slowly keep scraping that slag off of your molten ore, and then you end up with your well, in the unpurest sense, it was called blister copper. And in its purest form, it was called matte copper, M-A-T-T-E. And matte copper is what was eventually solidified hard or poured into ingots and then trucked off out of here. Yeah, here's the outline, what's left of the reverberatory furnace. Take a look at this. This sure would have been interesting to see when it was up and running. The people that built this building used what, brick? Look at here. Is that a VO1 period reverberatory? Well, that's pretty doggone cool, huh? Can't say I've seen that before in the side of one of these buildings. Interesting.